Hello, everyone, and welcome to the seventh ever episode of the Rays Hail Report. I'm your host, Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by the co host of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, Doug McCray. Doug, it's great to have you on.
Absolutely. I should be back on lucky number 7.
Absolutely. And, getting right into it, Jaden Daniels had, probably the greatest rookie season in NFL history last year. And I know there's a lot of pressure. He's definitely the player with the most pressure on this team going into 2025. What would you say is one aspect of his game that you would like to see be, most improved in year two?
Uh, that's a good one. I think it's simple, but probably throwing the ball away. A lot of sacks were taken last year that weren't really sacks.
Mhm,
It's because he'll run to the edge and doesn't find anything and then has to step out of bounds. Those hidden yards, the stuff in between, that's kind of where you win and lose ball games. So I know a lot of people probably would say over the middle of the field accuracy was his biggest need of improvement coming out of college, and maybe that is still what it is today. But I think what would
mhm,
be most useful is just tossing that thing away instead of taking those
mhm.
unnecessary quote unquote sacks. He's not getting hit, but it's counting.
Now, what about where are you at with his scrambling? I know he had 73 scrambles last year, which was 20 more or over 20 more than the quarterback in second place, Caleb Williams. And I just think obviously when you look at a bunch of dual threat quarterbacks in the league, Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, they've all suffered concussions. Josh Allen's been in concussion protocol, and I know Jaden Daniels has actually been in concussion protocol his last season at LSU after a hit from Dallas Turner against Alabama. So I don't really know if the amount of scrambles we've seen is sustainable in the long term. Is that something that you would also like to see less of this year?
Certainly. And I'd like to go back, and this is good, and I am gonna go figure this out when we're done. But I'd like to know like what the first half scrambling stats were and the second half of the season stats
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
Jayden did something last year that I really have never seen before. Like a basketball player can pick up an entire team and carry him on his back because that's
Mhm.
just kind of how the sport works. In football, that's not supposed to be how it works. But Jayden did that last year in a way that I've really never kind of seen before. And they needed his legs. I mean, he led the team in rushing the second half of the season. So I think if you can get back to that first half, and of course, I'm sure we'll get there, but the improvements in the offensive line ought to allow him to not have to scramble quite so much. He had no choice last year.
Mhm. And then, getting into the wide receiver room, there's obviously been a lot of talk about McLaurin, and I don't want to make that the whole point of the show because, I've brought up McLaurin in what feels like probably the last five shows, or, that's really the main thing going on around the organization. But 2 days ago on SportsCenter, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler stated that McLaurin is quote unquote not happy with where things are with an extension. First and foremost, how much of that statement do you think is actually Terry McLaurin and what he thinks rather than his agent kind of just trying to bring more attention to the situation as a whole?
The one thing that we know more of each year as we keep eyeballs on this thing is that that is all agent driven. And in no way, I mean, maybe there's a couple players that go out there to the media and put out their complaints.
Mhm,
Terry's not one of those guys, I assure you, but that's what he pays his agent for. Like that's the agent's job is get out there and say that. And listen, even if Terry were upset, that'd be fine. I mean, he
mhm.
probably feels like he deserves a contract immediately and he's not getting it. So if he were upset, I wouldn't necessarily blame him for that.
Mhm,
I thought it was interesting. We were on the George and I were on the Trap or Die podcast last
mhm.
night with Jamal
Yeah,
Forrest
saw
and
that.
those guys. And I was saying, I'd like to people keep talking about Terry and his last extension. And I said, what I'd like to know is when did like Brandon Ayuk get his deal done?
Mhm.
And somebody in the chat dropped it August 30th. Not till August 30th did Brandon Ayuk sign his deal. It was about the same time for Debo. So whatever the last group did, and when Terry signed has nothing to do with this year's group, and so with Adam Peters being a part of that regime,
Mhm,
that's the number I'd be looking. That's the data I'd be looking closer at.
mhm. So for
But it
me, I
gets done
think
real quick,
yeah,
Matthew, but it gets done because look at the room without him, like,
mhm,
and that's probably part of the negotiation problem, right?
yeah.
Like, if you look at that wide receiver room without Terry, not good.
So for me, I start to really raise an eyebrow when it gets to July 22nd. That's when veterans report to training
Mhm.
camp. So you wouldn't be concerned if the deal has not been done by then?
I would not be.
Mhm. And
It'd
then,
be nice. It'd be nice,
mhm,
and I don't think it's a deal breaker.
yeah. And then, sticking with the wide receiver room, um, the wide receiver 3 for Washington is completely open, assuming Noah Brown is healthy by the start of the season. I know there's been a lot of positive reports out about him recently. Does he keep that role as wide receiver 3, or could a younger guy like Jalen Lane or Luke McCaffrey kind of come for that role and, steal it from him?
Well, Noah Brown was on track for 800 yards last year before that crazy injury that he sustained.
Mhm,
So I think it's his job to lose. Now, I think McCaffrey probably will take a bit of a jump. I think something they mentioned on the podcast last night, and I forgot about this, but Wes Welker is in town as a wide receiver coach,
mhm,
who also was with Debo the year he had his best year. So I could see that being a great benefit. They brought in Lane, so I think there's an interesting in the way that Cliff deploys the wide receivers. There's room for everybody to get even shares outside of Debo and Terry, if that makes
mhm,
sense.
mhm. And then, some recent articles came out the other day. PFF ranked every team's offensive line
They did.
throughout the NFL. They put Washington at 19. Is that a fair judgment as of now? And how do you see that potentially changing or moving as the season is underway?
Well, the PFF have them ranked 19 because that's what the PFF stats say,
Mhm.
and they have their own way of judging that. And I know a lot of the PFF guys, so I mean they do great work.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that it's 19 compared to how their algorithm spits out the score.
Mhm.
Do I think they're the 19th best line in the league? No, I think they're better than that.
Mhm.
That's the 33rd team I think maybe put out today, or somebody put out today, the top 10 list, and they weren't in the top 10 list. If you don't want to put them in the top 10 list, that's fine.
Mhm.
But the only reason that I can see why you wouldn't have them as a top 15 unit is because Sam Cosmi's not starting the season off on that line, if that's how they're counting it. And they've got a rookie starting at right tackle, albeit a first round rookie. So listen, they upgraded the left tackle immensely. He's a top six-ish, five-ish tackle in the league. Brandon Coleman getting over to left guard couldn't be more important for this thing. Biotic might be one of the more underrated centers in the league. Sam Cosmi is not underrated. We just don't know when he'll be back. And then, of course, the first rounder over on the right side of me, if he's anything close to what they think he is, imagine what Cliff gets to do with the screen game with all those athletes on the line.
Mhm. And then, sticking with another PFF ranking, earlier today they also ranked each team secondary. Washington landed at 28. And I know that I'm not necessarily asking compared to what PFF ranked them because you stated that, PFF has their own system. But is Washington, like, say this was a different way of determining it, where do you see Washington secondary? Is that low for obviously a young secondary, but also a secondary with a lot of upside?
This doesn't make me quite as upset as the offensive line one does, just because there are so much unknowns
Yep.
in that secondary. What is Marshawn Lattimore going to be this year? If Lattimore is a top 10 corner and stays healthy, this league,
Mhm.
I mean, the group gets up into the top 15s real fast. I
Yeah.
mean, that is a premier corner when he's healthy
Mhm.
and right. I liked the Trey Harris pick. Um, and I think he's what they need on the other side. They want Sandra Strill inside, so that Trey Amos, Trey
Mhm.
Harris, Trey Amos, Trey Amos, my
Amos, yep.
sorry. Um, Sanders still kicks back inside. That's where they wanted him all along. However, he played a full season outside last year. You actually don't know what he'll look full time
Mhm.
inside. So that's the thing. But they also brought in the kid from J- Jonathan, who's the backup there outside. They brought in from New England because they thought he was going to start out there.
Jonathan Jones. Yep.
Thank you. They thought he was gonna start out there until they drafted the rookie when he fell
Yeah.
there. So and you still got Igbenogany. I actually think the corner like, if Marshawn is gonna be Marshawn or anywhere close to it, and the rookie plays like a fairly decent rookie, I actually think the cornerback room could be really interesting.
Mhm.
It's the safeties, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
what is Will Harris? We don't know. I mean, they obviously think he's an upgrade because the guy that they had last year got a very minimal contract from the Raiders, so they could have paid him, they didn't. Um, and then the other guy was playing with 2 torn shoulders.
Mhm.
Who and he's one of my favorite players in that secondary, but again, we don't really know what he is. If last year wasn't him at his best. So I think it's an interesting group. So,
Mhm.
it doesn't bother me that they're ranked that low.
And then who would you say is the commander with the most to prove or maybe the most on the line this season? Like, as I mentioned earlier, Jaden has the most pressure, but a guy who, if they have a bad year, this could be their last season in Washington. You know, a lot of their future determines on how they perform this season.
Well, I think it's easy to say Brian Robinson,
Mhm.
and a lot
Yeah.
of people will probably tell you that. But here's the thing, whether Brian Robinson stays here, he won't, or goes somewhere else, I don't think that he's a starting running back anywhere else ever in his career. And I mean, that's not a slight to him. He is a standard NFL running back, and for teams that are going to committee running backs and teams looking for juice, I mean, the team's got no juice. Think about how many drives they had last year where they started at the 5 and had to march the whole way down. I mean, they are desperately in need of explosive players. So I don't think it's Brian Robinson because I think it doesn't matter one way or the other how well he plays.
Mhm.
I think it's either Tunsil because
Mhm.
Tunsil's got to. I mean, Tunsil wants to deal when the year's over, right? He's got
Yeah.
2 years on his deal, one
Yeah.
after this one. I don't think there's any guaranteed money on the one next year.
Mhm.
So this is, for all intents and purposes, maybe one of his last. Think about the age. One of his last
Mhm.
big opportunities to
Yeah.
get a big bag. So I think it's very important for him. And again, it's a contract year for Devo. I mean, you think about we talk about this on our podcast all the time. Think about what the Commanders have him do right now. Figure out how much to pay Terry, 32, $33 million. And
Mhm.
then you got to, and then Deba's going to look at that number. And then come the end of the year, if he has a really good year, he's going to want that. So they're juggling a lot of things at the
Mhm.
same time. I think those two with Tunsil, because he's bound to get the biggest contract,
Mhm.
is looking for a big year.
100%. And then over the offseason, the Commanders signed Zach Ertz to the one-year deal. He's going to be 35 by the start of the 2026 season. Um, I'd say there's a good chance he's not a Commander next year, whether that's him retiring, Washington not, re-signing him due to age. How does that shake up the tight end position if he's not there next year? And when can we really expect to see Ben Sennett emerge or, become the clear-cut tight end 1 on this squad?
Well, it's interesting because I'm not sure that we've got any answer to that. I mean, Zach
Mhm,
Ertz played really well last year and stayed healthy. He was a touchdown machine the second half of the season. So while they drafted him, and I think maybe they drafted Senate a little high. Just that's
mhm,
my opinion. I like Senate, but is he's having a hard time getting on the field, and that doesn't change as long as Ertz stays healthy.
mhm,
I mean, you think about it, this is ironic, but Trey McBride didn't get on the field in Arizona with Cliff Kingsbury until Zach Ertz got hurt.
mhm,
And that's because they like Zach Ertz. When he's healthy, he's a really good player. So I don't know that they'll have to find packages for Senate because last year Senate got stuck as the third man in the 13 personnel so much of the time
mhm,
that if they weren't if they weren't running in play action, he just wasn't getting routes
Yep.
put in his direction. So next year, maybe, but I could see them. Listen, they're not stuck with Senate, right? I mean, next year, if they go into the draft and they say, "Hey, we feel like we could definitely do an upgrade here," there's no reason they can't do that.
Mhm. I mean, where are you at with him? Like, would you like to see him stay? Are you cool with moving on from him? I know he was a 53rd pick, you know, I guess late to mid second rounder.
Well, no, you want them to work out, right?
Mhm.
Because you did
Yep.
spend that's a good piece of draft capital
Mhm.
that you spent on him. Again,
Yep.
I maybe they drafted him too high. Maybe he was more of a mid-round 3rd pick, but you've got him. So yes, I mean, I hope he works out, and I think that he can. I was impressed with him. It's just that I'll say this.
Mhm.
At the same time that I think, man, you've gotta work him in because he's a second round pick, I also applaud the front office for not making anybody put him in
Yeah.
because he was a second round pick,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, it goes back to what Dan everybody's earning it. There's only 2 people on this team, Terry, when he gets back, makes 3 that aren't earning it.
Mhm. And, we're getting closer to training camp, as I mentioned, 18th for rookies, 22nd for veterans. Um, I know it's kind of getting late for this, but are there any free agents that still entice you that you wouldn't mind if Washington went and picked up?
I don't think so. I mean, Zadarius Smith and Von Miller are gonna be the names that you hear a bunch.
Yeah.
Amari Cooper is still out there. I mean, maybe. He looked
Mhm.
washed to me last year. So, I don't think so. I think whenever the cut deadline comes, right, and you'll see some of these surprise cuts, they might find somebody out there. But I think they like the way that the team's designed. Last year, they really got ran on, so the edges that they brought in, well, I think a lot of Commanders fans thought that they would go, like, speed, flash, edge rusher.
Mhm.
What they did is they brought in huge bodies to put on the outside, and they've got Deron Payne and Johnny Newton, who are a little bit more nimble and agile. Fastest way to the quarterback is a straight line.
Mhm.
So, I think that's kind of how they've reshaped what they're gonna do on defense this year, and again, they'll probably be, Luvu probably would be the number 1 in sacks this year.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's they're gonna move him around, and he'll
Yeah.
probably get some more. McGee's back. I mean, Joe Witt Jr. said that they had packages from McGee that they totally had to throw out when he got hurt. So, I think they're gonna be stout on the edges, rush up the middle, and let linebackers fly, and that's kinda how you'll get that.
Mhm. And, I don't wanna speak this into existence, but in a situation where Terry's deal doesn't get done and we decide to do a trade there and we don't get a wide receiver back for him, is Amari Cooper a player you would like to go after, or are you fine with how the wide receiver room looks right now?
We couldn't be fine with what it looks like after he's gone. But look, even if the deal didn't get done, they're not
Mhm,
going to trade him. They've still got this year. They've got is next year. He's still got one more, right? Either
mhm,
way, they can
yeah,
franchise. If there's nothing
yeah,
left next year, you just franchise him. The number actually isn't all that bad as
mhm,
far as wide receivers go, and what he was going to ask for anyway. Again, I don't think it'll get there, but
mhm,
no, I mean Amari Cooper's not even remotely in Terry's
mhm, yeah,
basket, as far as wide receivers go. And there's nobody left on the market that's gonna be better than Terry. And
mhm,
I know we said we wouldn't talk a ton about this, but they pushed their chips in, right, Matthew? I
mhm,
mean, they've
mhm,
done too much work on the team. They've given up too much resources for, Marshawn Lattimore and Tunsil and Debo Samuels. You're gonna do all that and then not find a way to keep Terry in, like, look at
mhm,
the wide
yeah,
receiver room,
yeah,
there's no way, and that might be part of the negotiation problems too, it's like, "Listen, you need Terry more than he needs you at this point," and, that's how those negotiations get wild, and that's why these guys have agents.
and then, one final question before we wrap things up. I know the, alternate jerseys are coming out, they're
Mhm.
being announced tomorrow. Are you, hoping for anything with those jerseys? Do you have any expectations?
I expect that the fan base will be unhappy, or at least a certain portion of it.
Mhm,
No, it doesn't matter to me. I
mhm,
I have ones that I would have preferred to seen. I'd like to seen the spear come back. That probably, I mean, obviously, if that's the helmet they're doing, then that's not it. I put on my timeline, I think it's the Doug Williams Super Bowl kit
Mhm.
with the burgundy. The
Yeah.
difference between that and the other one is the burgundy collar. I like the burgundy collar more anyway, and the white ones. The rumors that they'll do this and then make it like full time next year. The Jets did that a couple years ago, which is why I think people think that. I'd be
Mhm.
careful about what people say they've heard because not many people have heard anything about what it's going to be. So I don't know. I think it's interesting. The helmet could be a third, right? They've got an option for a third, so
Mhm.
it could be a yellow one, it could be a white one. Maybe they're redesigning the black one. It looks like it will have the W on it.
Mhm.
Um, it's been great fodder for a slow
Yeah.
summer.
I think the spear is enticing. I liked the one that had the spear, and then the uniform was like a real dark burgundy. Um, but I think the main concern with that, I don't know if they really want to go like fully away from the Redskins, and they just don't want to have any association there, and they just make it the W, which would also make sense.
Do you like the current uniforms?
I mean, they're basic, but I do think they serve their purpose, and especially when you're winning, you can get on board with anything, but I don't think it's anything special.
How much more basic one way or the other is the current burgundy on yellow compared to the Redskins burgundy and yellow?
Not much, not much.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. But with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up, where they can find some of your work?
Follow Matthew Heisman, he's the best. You ask and I do it, buddy. I love coming on here with you.
I really appreciate it. If you're watching, you made it up to this point. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And as always, we will see you next time.